Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the review copy I received of Grey Alien Games' card-counting RPG, Ancient Enemy. Find out if this particular title was aces in my book, or if the frottest of foes I encountered was the game itself. A lone mage rises from an unnatural slumber. Once familiar sights, now reduced to moldering ruins. Vague recollections of a quest to purge a great evil tickle at the forefront of his mind. But there's no indication of victory, Pyrrhic or otherwise. The world is a corrupted wasteland, desolate of life save for the festering abominations which plague the road. We join him as he seeks to regain his lost strength, in the hopes that he might be able to set things right and triumph over the great evil which awaits him, even as he faces a future without allies. Which is a slightly melodramatic summary of the game, but then it's actually fairly on point when it comes to its prose. There's some genuinely solid writing to accompany the various stages, enough so, in fact, that I found one of my primary motivations for going out of my way to do everything in an area, even when it's optional, was just for the sake of getting some more tasty lore. And as far as the actual plot develops, I found myself genuinely satisfied with both the journey and the outcome. I was also pleasantly surprised by the innovations that were implemented, which helped to make it a far more balanced experience than its predecessor, Shadowhand. At its core, the basic idea of the game remains the same. As you advance through stages, you match up cards in a way that seems to hybridize solitaire and speed, albeit with the gradual introduction of obstacle cards which require you to find the trigger for clearing them so you can progress. In any case, your big goal is to clear all the cards off the field, either for fun or because during combat segments it generates resources, which in turn allow you to use the abilities that are associated with that card type. That said, you are rewarded for extending combos well beyond the base requirements for activating your abilities, as higher card change increase the power of your cards and can also activate the bonus effects of certain spells. It also helps provide some bonus mana, which is basically this game's currency, not that you're apt to run into any financial woes if you're thorough. In any case, a major difference between this and Shadowhand is that the enemies no longer participate in the card matching aspect of the game. So you don't have to worry about them throwing off your carefully laid plans, or just getting excessively lengthy combos and obliterating your health unexpectedly. Instead, the abilities gain charges after every action, with them signaling what action they'll be taking next so you can strategize accordingly. It makes the overall back and forth of combat feel a great deal more tactical, and altogether fair. Enough so, in fact, that while the Nightmare mode was challenging, it didn't make me feel like clobbering my face back and forth across my keyboard in despair. And this was despite the fact that Nightmare mode heavily scales up the health and damage of the combat encounters. Heck, even the added stress from max difficulty specific modifier of needing to restart the chapter if you die didn't trip me up. Well, that much. There's a little death involved. It does help that you have a solid array of attacks and defense spells to find or purchase over the course of the game, with a solid amount of them benefiting different playstyles, like stacking up statuses to try and suppress and bleed out an enemy, building up high combos, playing defensively to set up decisive counterattacks, or even just ending a turn on a high card. That said, the highly focused nature of all the spells means you'll need to swap out between them occasionally because of the attacks enemies use or their type. Seriously, make sure to check the enemy stats before the fight, as while nothing has elemental weaknesses, they certainly can have heavy resistances or immunities. Though, you'll at least be spared swapping clothes around constantly as you're freed from the tyrannical embrace of the effective yet garish rainbow pimp fashion catastrophe that rested central to Shadowhand. No, at most, the only other element you'll need to fuss with are your passive and actives, which I generally didn't need to change around unless I found new combinations, because to be fair, whilst bouncing a card off the board can certainly provide the option to continue a combo or get rid of an obnoxious card, turning everything to a single color with one active skill and then blowing up every single card of that color and gaining those resources, well, that was pretty hard to pass up. And unlike your combat spells, these are still quite viable in the low-key solitaire rooms. Because not every stage is a violent duel to the death. Instead, you have the puzzle rooms, where you're tasked with clearing the board of all cards on it in a limited number of moves. Considering that you don't suffer any direct adverse effects for failing to clear one, even in Nightmare mode, these end up feeling like breathers. What's more, they frequently hide consumable items, like precious healing potions, which are especially precious since by default, you only heal at the end of a chapter. That said, they're also an excellent source of some unique passive and active card skills, harboring some of the most potent ones you can acquire, provided you can dig down to where they're hiding. And given that you're normally only able to purchase new abilities at the end of a given chapter, I really didn't mind going out of my way to tackle all the optional side routes for the chance of further fleshing out my arsenal with unique cards. That said, for those folks who are in the mood for a more streamlined experience, while you will miss out on optional skills and mana, the game's character progression system won't punish you for eschewing encounters. See, while your character does have levels, they're tied to clearing the game's various chapters instead of clearing stages. What's more, while it's relatively small, there is a nice amount of customization possible for players. That said, if you are looking forward to replaying chapters, I would like to take this moment to mention that there isn't actually a new game plus, and once you've cleared a chapter, it's done, which means you can't really farm them or the like. Anyways, onto a visual front, Ancient Enemy is fairly pleasant to look at. I'm actually rather fond of the overall character design for both the enemies and the protagonist, especially with the subtle changes that start to get invoked in your hero's appearance as you progress forward. The varied animations for all the game's abilities was also a nice touch. That said, I do have a minor nitpick to make here, and it's in regards to the worm cards. See, worm cards essentially serve as Ancient Enemy's wild card, allowing you to continue on combos and get unstuck. Normally, you'll either find them randomly in a match or as a reward, though there are ways to farm them, which can end up backfiring on you, since you can only harbor 9 of these cards, and the UI doesn't actually give you a visual sort of warning when you're at cap. I found myself relying on the DIY solution of slamming pause when I was unsure and manually just counting them out a fair bit more often than I'd have liked. But then, the lesson was ingrained in me, if only because if you click on one when capped, it simply wastes itself. That small gripe aside, it's time to talk sound design, and heck, was I pleasantly surprised. If only because it actually managed to give me chills in a few instances. The game has a fairly nice soundtrack to accompany its various stages, but what really sold it for me was that there's some genuinely unsettling bits of ambience that really flesh out some of the tracks and provide them an altogether spooky vibe. And with all that said, that leaves me with our conclusion. And I gotta say, I was fond of my time with this game. Its solitaire meets RPG vibe allowed for a relaxing and altogether enjoyable journey. And I was certainly fond of the game's story, as the prose that accompanied the various encounters really helped to hammer in the game's lore and overall mood. What really had me pleased as punch, however, was just how well balanced the overall game experience felt, especially in comparison to its predecessor. Overall, I'd say that Ancient Enemy makes for a hit, providing a solid gaming experience, and one that I didn't even mind replaying to tackle its highest difficulty once I had a better understanding of its mechanics. Anywho, thanks for tuning in, folks. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link in the banner or description to become part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. And lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor Rand and to make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description and banner for them lips. For them links. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.